Hi, welcome back. Let's continue with our learning on SQL constraint. And in this session, we'll be talking about unique constraints. So I'm going to bring up my slide. Uh, okay, yeah. So unique constraint. We've been talking about SQL constraints, and by now you would understand that constraints are rules that we place on our database tables, and we put these rules in place so that we can either allow or not allow certain things to be done on the table. All right. So in this session, we'll be talking about unique constraints. And by the end of the session, you understand what a unique constraint is. When do we use unique constraint over primary key constraint? And what are the differences between unique constraint and primary key constraint? You already know what primary keys are, so we won't go into detail of that, but we would like to differentiate between the two. Okay, unique constraint. We use unique key constraint to enforce uniqueness of a column. That is, the column shouldn't allow any duplicate values. So from the word unique, it typically means that the rows on the column of that table have to be unique. So let's say, for example, on a table you have email addresses. It expected that email addresses are unique to everybody. So you can place a unique constraint on that table on the email column to say every data that comes into this table remains unique for email addresses, because you can't have an email address that is the same. It's just not possible. If you created email address with Gmail, for example, successfully, and you want to create the same name again, Gmail will tell you this name has already been taken. And how does Gmail know that? Because on their table they have a unique constraint somewhere that helps them to check if an email address has been created before or not. So that's basically what unique does. And from your knowledge about primary key constraints, that's the same thing that primary keys do. It enforces uniqueness on a database column. But I mean, you would start wondering what's the difference between the two. Both primary key and unique keys are used to enforce the uniqueness of a column. We know that. And now we'll start asking ourselves the question, do we know when to use one over the other? How do you know that? Alright, the answer is there. A table can have only one primary key. So that's one rule. For a table to exist, once you define a primary key on a table, you cannot define another primary key on that same table. So if you need more uniqueness for some more of your columns on that table, you cannot define another primary key, but you have another constraint that you can define, which is a unique constraint. So that is when you use both of them together. So you use a primary key at first, and then later on you start using unique key, because you can have more than one unique key on one table. Okay, so that's when you introduce your unique key. And what's the difference between primary key and unique key? Number one, a table can have only one primary key but more than one unique key. I already said that. Number two, a primary key does not allow nulls, whereas a unique key allows one null. So when you create your table and you say, and you give your table columns, and the columns you specify null or not null. Now, if you have primary key on the table, you cannot have null. I mean, you can't give that column a null value. Everything must have a value, and each of those values must be unique. On the other flip side, unique doesn't work that way. unique can allow at least one null on the table. So this is a common, I wouldn't say common, but it's an interview question that you can be asked, that what's the difference between unique and primary key? And the question might actually come in the form of a scenario that will be played for you, where we will be having a number of videos on interview questions and answers. So we will definitely put this one in it, and you will see how to answer the question, and if you need to demonstrate, you will see how to demonstrate the question. So let me go into the management studio and demonstrate these things that we've been talking about. Right, so this time around the database we'll be creating is unique constraint. So remember, from DDL, create unique constraint, and don't forget, switch into your database unique constraint, so we don't make the same mistake we made when we were doing check constraint. So we'll create this table in our unique constraints database, and before we alter and add our constraint, I like to say this. Remember, from the past videos that we've had, we've seen that there are usually 2 to 3 ways to do one particular thing. The same thing applies to unique constraint as well. You can actually create a unique constraint using the graphical user interface, or you can create it using your SQL. Also, with SQL, you can either create the unique constraint at the time you're creating the table, or after the table has been created without the unique constraint, you can alter the table and later on add the unique constraint. It's pretty much the same thing. Remember, when we did for check constraint, all we did was just put check here and put the expression. Similarly, it's just the same syntax. We'll just change it to unique and put what we want. But we'll get into this in a minute. Let me first show you how to create it using the graphical user interface. So let me go into the unique database. I'll refresh this and go into the unique database, and we have our table. So we've created this table here, and we have all these columns. So I'd like to create a unique constraint on this email column. So to do that, I will right click on the table and go to design. Once I get to design, I'll come to the email, right click, and I'll click on indexes and keys. So if you hit that, you get this box come up. Now you can see it says selected primary key or unique index. Let me add something, and adding it just comes by default IX student. Now we will go in detail into indexes, but not now. Forget about indexes for now. Our focus is the unique key. So to specify the unique key, what we have to do now is to say, okay, on what column do we want the unique key to be? So if you click on that little box there and scroll down, you select the email and the sort order. Forget about this now. When we start talking about indexes, you would understand more about this sort order. But for now, just leave it at the default and click OK. The next thing is going to ask you, is unique, no or yes? We want it to be unique, and we'll say yes. And what's the type of unique? What's the type? It's a unique key. It's not an index, so we'll click on unique key. So the naming convention will be UQ. You can name it anything, but just to easily identify that the name of this constraint is a unique key. Remember, all our constraints that we create will have their own identity. They have their own names. So for foreign key, you will see FK. For primary key, you will see PK. For check constraint, you will see CK. For unique constraint, you will see UQ. Okay, these are just default, common naming conventions. It doesn't mean that you can't use anything you want. All right. So on what table are we creating this unique constraint? It is on student table. And on what column? You can just add that it is going to be created on email column. So this way you can easily tell if you see this, the name of this constraint, and you're trying to do some sort of reverse engineering and you want to know where this unique constraint is coming from, looking at the name alone, having a good naming convention like this, you can easily tell that, oh, this is a unique constraint. It is on the students table and it is on the column email on students table. So this is how to create it graphically, and by the time you click close, you would have your unique constraint created. And then you come here and then you do save. But I don't want to save this because I want us to actually create it using the T-SQL. So we've created a table already, and if we had not created the table and we just wanted to create the uniqueness as part of the table, we can simply just go onto the column that we want it to be, which is the email, and just add unique, and that's it. That's all you have to do, unique. And if you run it like that, it would create the unique constraint. Let me delete this for you to see what I'm talking about. So if I created this table in unique constraint database, you see it's completed. If I refresh this, you will see that we have, if you go to keys, you will see UQ student, and because we actually created these without specifying a name, we just allowed the database engine to specify a name for us, and that's how SQL Server handles his own way of giving such objects their own identity. Okay, so I'm going to delete this now and show you the final way in which we create it and then run some examples. So I would remove this unique and create this table again. And while we do that, we can now say alter table student, add constraints, and then specify the name of this constraint that you want and tell it it is unique on what column? Email column. And if you say execute, okay, we need to fix. I can see where the problem is. It's the S that we added there. It's actually constraint. And as you can see, you would have noticed that the color changed to blue because it is a keyword. It is not something that we provided for it. So if I now click on that, now it's gone successfully. So if you refresh this, we can see that our key is now being created. So let's try to actually put in a data that violates this uniqueness. So at first we would put this data into the table. Okay, that's because we have fewer columns. So we have person ID on the table, person ID. We have first name, we have last name. Okay, we haven't specified email, and that's where the problem is. So now we should be fine. Yes. So if we select from this table, we would see our data. So let's now try to put in the same data again, and remember on email column we have a unique constraint, meaning we should not be able to have another data of the same value like we have here, especially on the email column, because that's where we define the unique constraint. So if I execute this again, we should have a violation of unique key constraint, and it's giving us the name of the unique constraint, and it says the reason why it cannot allow that to happen. And it's simple. It says cannot insert duplicate key in object student, and that's it. So this is, all about unique constraints that you already know. If we wanted to add additional constraints on the table, all we need to do is just alter the table and add the constraint, and we can have as many unique constraints on one table, but we cannot do that for primary key. You can't have more than one primary key on the table, but you can have more than two unique key constraints on one table. So that's all about unique key constraints. I would see you in the next video.